The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Jane Harper as she stumbled forward, her cracked lips parting in a desperate gasp for air. The Colorado Territory stretched endlessly before her, the once promising trail to Anima's Forks now seeming like a death sentence. Her 5-year-old daughter Emma clung to her skirt while 3-year-old Daniel whimpered in her arms, his small body growing heavier with each step. The year was 1878, and Jane's dream of starting anew after her husband's death had brought her to the brink of collapse in this unforgiving wilderness. "Just a little further," Jane whispered, though she no longer believed her own words. Sweat trickled down her face, mixing with tears of exhaustion. Her children needed water. They needed shelter. They needed a miracle. As the world began to spin around her, Jane's knees buckled. She managed to twist her body to protect Daniel as she fell, her last conscious thought being a prayer that someone would find them before it was too late. Kenton Quinn had spent the morning tracking a mountain lion that had been threatening his cattle. The 30-year-old rancher knew every inch of the land surrounding his property, and something about the stillness in the air made him redirect his horse toward the northern trail. That's when he spotted them, a woman and 2 small children collapsed in the dirt, their belongings scattered about them like abandoned hopes. "Whoa there, Samson," he murmured to his stallion, dismounting swiftly and rushing to the fallen figures. The woman was alive, but barely. Her skin burned with fever, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. The children were conscious but terrified, the little girl shaking her mother's shoulder while the boy cried softly. "Mama won't wake up," the girl said, her blue eyes wide with fear as she looked up at Kenton. "It's going to be all right," Kenton said, kneeling beside them. "My ranch isn't far. I'm going to help you." He offered the children water from his canteen, helping them drink slowly while assessing their condition. The boy seemed unable to speak, clinging to his sister like she was his lifeline. The girl, though frightened, had a resilience in her eyes that reminded Kenton of his late sister. "What's your name, little one?" he asked gently. "Emma Harper," she replied. "This is Danny. Mama's Jane. We're going to Anima's Forks to live with Aunt Sarah, but Mama said she got lost." Kenton nodded, looking around at their meager possessions, a single trunk, a satchel, and what appeared to be a small pouch of coins. These people had clearly been through hardship long before reaching this trail. "I need to get your mama someplace safe," Kenton explained, gathering up their belongings and securing them to Samson's saddle. "I'm going to carry her and you'll both ride my horse. Can you hold onto the saddle for me, Emma?" The little girl nodded, watching with solemn eyes as Kenton lifted Jane into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body frail from what must have been weeks of insufficient food. Something protective stirred in Kenton as he settled the children onto Samson's back before mounting behind them, cradling Jane securely against his chest. "My ranch is just beyond that ridge," he told Emma, pointing to the horizon. "We'll be there soon." The Quinn Ranch sprawled across 200 acres of the most fertile land in the valley. As they approached, Kenton could see his foreman, Miguel Santos, working with the cattle in the south pasture. Miguel spotted them and immediately rode over, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Senor Quinn, what happened?" "Found them on the North Trail," Kenton explained. "The woman's in bad shape. Ride ahead and tell Mrs. Fitzgerald to prepare the guest room and some broth." Miguel nodded, immediately galloping toward the main house. By the time Kenton arrived with his unexpected guests, his housekeeper, Martha Fitzgerald, was already waiting on the porch, her sleeves rolled up and her gray hair escaping its bun. Bring her in," the older woman urged, ushering Kenton toward the house. "The poor dear looks half dead. And these little ones. Come, children, let's get you something to eat while Mr. Quinn tends to your mother." Jane remained unconscious as Kenton carried her to the guest bedroom on the first floor. Martha followed with a basin of cool water and clean cloths, shooing Kenton out while she removed Jane's dusty clothes and bathed her fevered skin. In the kitchen, Emma sat at the large oak table, carefully feeding her brother spoonfuls of stew while Kenton watched, impressed by the child's maturity. "Your mama's going to be all right," he reassured them, though he wasn't certain it was true. "Mrs. Fitzgerald is taking good care of her." "Are you a real cowboy?" Danny asked suddenly, his first words since their rescue. Kenton smiled, crouching to meet the boy's eyes. "I suppose I am. This is my ranch, the Double Q. We raise cattle and horses." "Mama said we're going to live with Aunt Sarah," Emma said, her small brow furrowing. "But I don't remember her. Papa died in the fire, and then we had to leave Chicago because the bank took our house." The simplicity with which the child stated their tragedy struck Kenton deeply. He had known his share of loss: his parents to cholera when he was 18, his sister to childbirth 3 years ago. But these children had lost everything and everyone, save their mother, who now fought for her life in his guest bedroom. "Well, you're safe here until your mama's better," Kenton assured them. "Then we can figure out how to find your Aunt Sarah." Martha emerged from the bedroom an hour later, her expression grave. "The fever's high, Mr. Quinn. She's suffering from heat exhaustion and malnutrition. I've managed to get some water into her, but she's still not conscious." She lowered her voice. "I found bruises on her arms and back that aren't from the fall. That woman's been through something terrible before you found her." Kenton nodded, processing this information while the children finished their meal, unaware of the conversation. "Do what you can, Mrs. Fitzgerald. The children will need somewhere to sleep tonight." "I've already made up the room next to hers with a trundle bed for the little one," Martha replied. "The poor dears are exhausted." That night, after ensuring the children were settled, Kenton sat beside Jane's bed, studying her face in the lamplight. Even in unconsciousness, there was a strength to her features: high cheekbones, a determined chin, and dark lashes that contrasted with her pale skin. Her brown hair, now clean and spread across the pillow, had glints of auburn when the light caught it. "Who are you, Jane Harper?" he whispered. "And what were you running from?" As if in response, Jane's eyelids fluttered and she let out a soft moan. Kenton leaned forward, taking her hand in his. "You're safe," he said gently. "Your children are safe too." Jane's eyes opened fully, revealing irises the color of whiskey. For a moment, confusion clouded her gaze, then panic. She tried to sit up, her movements frantic. "Emma, Danny," she gasped, her voice raw. "They're sleeping in the next room," Kenton assured her, gently restraining her from rising. "They're fine. You collapsed on the trail to Anima's Forks. I brought you to my ranch, the Double Q. I'm Kenton Quinn." Jane stared at him, processing his words, then sank back against the pillows, exhaustion overwhelming her brief surge of energy. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought we were going to die out there." "You nearly did," Kenton replied honestly. "What were you doing on that trail alone with 2 young children?" Jane's eyes closed briefly. "Trying to reach my husband's sister in Anima's Forks. After James died, after the fire, there was nowhere else to go." Her voice trailed off, and Kenton could see she was slipping back into unconsciousness. He gently placed her hand back on the bed. "Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger." Over the next 3 days, Jane drifted in and out of consciousness while Martha tended to her needs and Kenton looked after the children. To his surprise, he found himself enjoying their company. Emma was curious about everything on the ranch, asking endless questions about the horses and cattle. Danny, once he overcame his initial shyness, followed Kenton everywhere, watching with solemn eyes as he went about his daily tasks. "Have you always been a cowboy?" Emma asked on the 3rd morning as Kenton taught her how to feed the chickens. "Not always," he admitted, showing her how to scatter the grain without frightening the hens. "I was born in Boston. My father was a banker. When I was 16, he decided to move the family west for a new start. We settled near Denver first, then moved here when I was 20. "Where are your mama and papa now?" Danny asked, clutching a handful of chicken feed. Kenton's smile faltered slightly. "They died a long time ago, partner, but I had a sister named Catherine who lived with me until she married and moved to San Francisco." Is she with the angels too, like our papa? Emma asked with the directness only a child could manage. Yes, Kenton said softly, she is. On the fourth day, Jane finally awoke fully, her fever broken. Martha helped her into a sitting position, supporting her with pillows while she spooned broth into her mouth. My children, Jane said between sips. I need to see them. They've been asking for you too, Martha replied, her tone motherly, but you need your strength first. Mr. Quinn has been taking good care of them. A flicker of worry crossed Jane's face. Mr. Quinn, the man who found us, I don't remember much. He's a good man, Martha assured her. Never married, keeps to himself mostly, built this ranch from nothing after his parents passed. The children have taken quite a shine to him, especially the boy. Jane nodded slowly, trying to process her situation. She was completely dependent on the kindness of a stranger something experience had taught her to be wary of. How long until I can travel? She asked. Martha's eyebrows shot up. Travel? My dear, you were at death's door just days ago. You won't be going anywhere for at least 2 weeks, and that's if you recover well. Jane bit her lip, clearly distressed by this news. I don't have the means to repay Mr. Quinn's kindness for that long. We need to reach my sister-in-law in Anima's Forks. Mr. Quinn hasn't asked for payment, Martha said firmly. And Anima's Forks is still a day's ride from here, not a journey to be undertaken lightly, especially with small children. Before Jane could respond, the door opened and Emma rushed in, followed more cautiously by Danny. Mama, Emma cried, climbing onto the bed and throwing her arms around Jane. Danny stood by the bedside, his thumb in his mouth, until Jane extended her arm to him and he burrowed against her side. My loves, Jane murmured, pressing kisses to their heads. I've missed you so much. Mr. Quinn showed me how to feed chickens, Emma announced proudly. And Danny got to ride on a pony. Jane glanced up to see Kenton standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He wore simple clothes, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing sun-browned forearms and worn denims. His face was weathered from years outdoors, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat, which he now removed respectfully. Mrs. Harper, he greeted her. It's good to see you awake. You gave us quite a scare, Mr. Quinn, Jane replied, suddenly conscious of how vulnerable she must appear. I don't know how to thank you for saving our lives. No thanks needed, he assured her. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would take in 3 strangers, care for them, feed them, without expectation of reward. Mrs. Fitzgerald tells me you're anxious to continue your journey, Kenton continued, but I hope you'll consider staying until you're fully recovered. The children seemed to be settling in well. Jane stroked Emma's hair, considering his words. You've already done more than enough, Mr. Quinn. I don't wish to impose further. It's no imposition, he replied. The house has been too quiet since. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. The children bring life to the place, and there's plenty of room. There was something in his expression, a loneliness that echoed her own, that made Jane nod slowly. Thank you. Perhaps another week, if you're certain, Kenton smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. I am. Now, I'll leave you to rest while I steal these 2 helpers away. The horses won't feed themselves. As the days passed, Jane regained her strength gradually. She began taking short walks around the house, then venturing onto the porch to watch her children play in the yard. Emma had appointed herself assistant to Mrs. Fitzgerald, helping with simple cooking tasks, while Danny shadowed Kenton whenever possible, developing a hero worship for the rancher that was both touching and concerning to Jane. She didn't want her son growing attached to a man who would soon be just another person they left behind. One evening, about 10 days after their arrival, Jane found Kenton on the porch after the children were asleep. He was smoking a pipe, the sweet aroma of tobacco drifting on the cool night air. May I join you? She asked. Kenton stood immediately, offering her the rocking chair. Please, how are you feeling? Much better, Jane admitted, settling into the chair. Thanks to you and Mrs. Fitzgerald. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, looking out at the stars that scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "I should tell you," Jane finally said, "about why we were on that trail." Kenton turned toward her, his expression open but not prying. "If you want to." Jane took a deep breath. "My husband, James, was a bookkeeper in Chicago, a good man but not always, prudent with our finances. He made some investments that didn't pan out. When the panic hit last year, we lost everything, then the fire." She paused, steadying her voice. "James died trying to save our neighbors. Afterward, I discovered he had taken loans from unsavory characters." Kenton's jaw tightened. "These people threatened you," Jane nodded, unconsciously rubbing the fading bruises on her arm. "They came to collect what James owed. When I couldn't pay, one of them suggested I could work off the debt in other ways. The implication hung in the air between them. I took what little we had left and fled that night," Jane continued. James had mentioned his sister Sarah had settled in Anima's Forks with her husband, a miner. "It was the only place I could think to go." "Have you had any correspondence with her?" Kenton asked. Jane shook her head. "None. James wasn't close with his family. I'm not even certain she'll welcome us, but I have to try. The children need stability, safety." Kenton was quiet for a long moment, contemplating her story. "I know most everyone in Anima's Forks. What's Sarah's husband's name?" "Wilcox," Jane replied. "Thomas Wilcox." A shadow crossed Kenton's face. "Mrs. Harper, Jane, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Thomas Wilcox died in a mine collapse last winter. Sarah sold their claim and moved on. Last I heard, she had remarried and moved to California." The blood drained from Jane's face. "No," she whispered. "That can't be." "I'm sorry," Kenton said gently. "I should have mentioned it sooner, but you were so ill, and then I didn't want to burden you before you had regained your strength." Jane stood abruptly, gripping the porch railing for support as the implications washed over her. No sister-in-law, no refuge, no plan. "What am I going to do?" she murmured, more to herself than to Kenton. "I have nowhere to go, almost no money left." Kenton rose and stood beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. You and the children are welcome here for as long as you need." Jane turned to look at him, searching his face for ulterior motives, for the catch that surely must come with such an offer. But she saw only sincerity in his steady gaze. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Kenton looked out at the land stretching before them, his expression thoughtful. "When my sister died, I was alone for the first time in my life. This ranch, everything I've built. It doesn't mean much without people to share it with. Your children have brought something back to this place that I didn't realize was missing." He hesitated, then added, "And you, Jane, you have more courage than most men I know. To leave everything behind to protect your children, to face the wilderness alone rather than submit to those who would harm you. That kind of strength deserves support, not charity." Jane felt tears welling in her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since James's death. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," Kenton replied simply. "At least until you decide what comes next." The following weeks brought a new rhythm to life at the Double Q Ranch. Jane, determined not to be a burden, insisted on taking over household duties from Mrs. Fitzgerald, who had been traveling daily from her home in town. The older woman was grateful for the assistance, having managed both her own home and Kenton's for years. "The man would live on coffee and beef jerky if I didn't cook for him," Martha confided to Jane one afternoon as they preserved peaches from the orchard. "Never complains, but doesn't look after himself proper. Too busy with the ranch." Jane found herself enjoying the domestic tasks that had once felt like drudgery in Chicago. Here, there was purpose to everything. The bread she baked fed not just her family, but the ranch hands who worked the land. The clothes she mended weren't just for appearance, but for protection against the elements. Even the floors she swept served to keep the ever-present dust of ranch life at bay. Emma and Danny thrived in the fresh air and freedom of the ranch. Emma had discovered a love for horses and spent hours in the stable with Miguel, learning the names and temperaments of each animal. Danny, still Kenton's shadow, was learning the basics of ranching: how to tell a sick calf from a healthy one, how to mend a fence, how to respect the land that provided their livelihood. And Kenton, Jane found herself watching him when he wasn't aware. The gentleness with which he instructed Danny, the patience he showed with Emma's endless questions, the respect he commanded from his men without ever raising his voice. He was unlike any man she had known in Chicago, straightforward, without pretense, his word as solid as the mountains that framed his land. One evening in late August, Jane found Emma sitting on the porch steps, her face troubled. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Jane asked, settling beside her daughter. Emma looked up, her blue eyes serious. "Are we going to leave soon, Mama?" Jane hesitated. The question had been circling her own mind for weeks. "Would that make you sad?" Emma nodded emphatically. "I love it here. Danny does too, and Mr. Quinn would be all alone again." "Mr. Quinn managed just fine before we came along," Jane pointed out gently. "But he wasn't happy," Emma insisted with a child's perception. "He smiles now. He laughed yesterday when Danny tried to lasso the fence post and got tangled in the rope instead." Jane had heard that laugh too deep and genuine, transforming Kenton's usually serious face into something boyish and carefree. It had made something flutter in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, not since the early days with James. "We can't stay forever, Emma," Jane said carefully. "Mr. Quinn has been very kind, but this is his home, not ours." "Why can't it be ours too?" Emma persisted. "Don't you like him, Mama?" Jane felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's not. It's complicated, Emma. Grown-up things often are." "It's not complicated," Emma declared with certainty. "You like him and he likes you. I see how he looks at you when you're cooking or reading to us. It's the same way Papa used to look at you before he got sad about the money." Jane was saved from responding by the arrival of Kenton himself, returning from checking the herd in the north pasture. He dismounted smoothly, leading his horse toward them. "Evening, ladies," he greeted them, tipping his hat. "Beautiful sunset tonight." Emma jumped up. "Mr. Quinn, can I help brush down Samson?" "If your mother doesn't mind," Kenton replied, glancing at Jane with a smile that seemed to hold a question. "Go ahead," Jane said, "but come in when Miguel rings the dinner bell." As Emma led the horse toward the stable, chattering the entire way, Kenton took her place on the step beside Jane. "She's a natural with horses," he observed. "Miguel says she has the touch." "She's always loved animals," Jane replied. "In Chicago, she had to make do with strays and the neighbor's cat. This place is paradise for her." Kenton seemed to consider his words carefully before speaking again. "Jane, I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Her heart quickened inexplicably. "Yes." "Winter comes early in these mountains," he began. "The first snow can hit as early as September, and the passes to the larger towns become impassable by October." Jane felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "I see. You're saying we need to decide our next step soon." Kenton nodded, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "If you're planning to move on before winter, yes." The unspoken alternative hung between them. "If you're planning to stay." "Kenton," Jane said, using his first name for the first time, "you've already done so much for us. I can't imagine imposing on your hospitality through the winter." "It wouldn't be an imposition," he replied, his voice low and earnest. "Jane, I've grown accustomed to having you all here. The children, yes, but you especially." Jane's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" Kenton turned to face her fully, his eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight. "I'm saying that I care for you, Jane, more than I expected to. More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time, and if you felt you could stay, make a life here, I would consider myself fortunate beyond measure." Jane looked away, overwhelmed by his words and the emotions they stirred in her. "It's been less than 2 months since we arrived. We barely know each other." "I know that you're strong and resilient," Kenton countered. "I know that you love your children fiercely. I know that you make the best apple pie I've ever tasted and that you hum when you think no one's listening. I know that you're beautiful in the morning light and that your laugh makes me forget every worry I've ever had." He reached out, tentatively taking her hand. "I'm not asking for promises, Jane, just time to see if what I feel, what I hope you might come to feel, could grow into something permanent." Jane looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of ranch work, her smaller but no less work-worn. "I was married for 7 years," she said softly. "I thought I knew what love was, but James changed after we lost our money. He grew distant, bitter. By the end, we were like strangers sharing a house." She met Kenton's gaze. "I'm afraid to trust again, to be vulnerable." "I understand fear," Kenton replied. "After my sister died, I was afraid to care about anyone, knowing they could be taken away. But living in fear isn't really living, Jane." The dinner bell rang, interrupting the moment. Jane gently withdrew her hand. "I need time to think," she said. Kenton nodded, respecting her need for space. "Take all the time you need." That night, long after the children were asleep, Jane stood by the window of her bedroom, looking out at the moonlit landscape. The ranch was beautiful in the silvery light, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. In the 2 months they had been there, it had begun to feel like home in a way Chicago never had, and Kenton. Jane closed her eyes, imagining his face, his voice, the security she felt in his presence. What he offered wasn't just shelter or protection, but the possibility of partnership, of shared purpose. Of love. Was she ready to open her heart again, to risk disappointment, heartbreak? The practical part of her argued that accepting Kenton's offer was the sensible choice, security for her children, a future on a prosperous ranch, the protection of a good man. But Jane didn't want to accept out of practicality. Kenton deserved more than that. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Emma standing there, clutching her rag doll. "I had a bad dream," Emma whispered, "about the fire and Papa." Jane gathered her daughter into her arms, sitting on the edge of the bed with Emma in her lap. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emma nodded against her shoulder. "I dreamed we were back in Chicago and the men who hurt you were looking for us. But then Mr. Quinn came and saved us, like he did for real." Jane stroked her daughter's hair, surprised by this revelation. "Do you still think about those men, Emma?" "Sometimes," Emma admitted, "but not as much anymore. I feel safe here with Mr. Quinn." She looked up at Jane with solemn eyes. "He wouldn't let anyone hurt us, would he, Mama?" "No," Jane agreed softly, "he wouldn't." "Then why can't we stay?" Emma asked, the question seemingly simple yet laden with complexity. Jane sighed, searching for words a child could understand. "It's not just about being safe, Emma, when grown-ups decide to. To build a life together, it needs to be for the right reasons. Love, respect, shared dreams." "But don't you love Mr. Quinn?" Emma persisted. "Even a little bit." The question caught Jane off guard. Did she love Kenton Quinn? She certainly admired him, respected him, enjoyed his company. The thought of leaving him created an ache in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. "I care for him very much," Jane admitted, as much to herself as to Emma. "But love takes time to grow, sweetheart." Emma seemed to consider this. "Papa always said you knew right away with him, that it was like lightning." Jane smiled sadly at the memory. "That's what he said, yes. And maybe it was for him. But sometimes love is quieter, more like the sunrise. Gradual, steady, until suddenly the whole world is bright." Emma yawned, nestling against Jane's shoulder. "I think Mr. Quinn loves you like the sunrise, Mama." As Jane tucked her daughter back into bed, she pondered Emma's words. Perhaps the child had more insight than Jane gave her credit for. Kenton's feelings hadn't come as a lightning strike, but had developed over these months of shared meals, quiet evenings, and the daily rhythms of ranch life. And her own feelings. Jane returned to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. The truth was, she couldn't imagine leaving now, couldn't imagine not seeing Kenton every day, not watching her children thrive in this place, not feeling the sense of purpose and peace that had eluded her for so long. Maybe that was love, not the desperate passion of youth, but the steady warmth of finding where you belong and with whom. The next morning brought an unexpected disruption to the ranch's routine. Jane was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking out the window, she saw 3 riders coming up the path to the house, unfamiliar men with hard faces and city clothes that looked out of place against the backdrop of the mountains. A cold dread settled in Jane's stomach. She quickly checked that the children were still upstairs before stepping onto the porch just as Kenton emerged from the barn to intercept the visitors. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Kenton called, his stance casual but alert. The leader of the group, a heavy-set man with a thick mustache, reined his horse to a stop. "Looking for a woman and 2 young uns. Name of Harper. Heard in town they might be staying here." Jane froze, her hand gripping the porch railing. How had they found her? Who in Anima's forks would have known to direct them here? Kenton's expression remained impassive. "May I ask your business with Mrs. Harper?" The man smiled unpleasantly. "Family matter. Her late husband owed a considerable sum to my employer. Mrs. Harper agreed to certain arrangements before she departed Chicago rather suddenly." "Is that so?" Kenton replied, his tone deceptively light. "And your employer would be Mr. Vincent Blackmore," the man said, as if the name should mean something. "A businessman from Chicago with interests throughout the territory." Jane felt her knees weaken. Blackmore was the lone shark who had threatened her, whose men had left those bruises on her arms. She hadn't realized his reach extended this far west. Kenton seemed to consider this information. "Well, I'm afraid I can't help you. There's no one by that name here." The man's eyes narrowed. "That's interesting, because we have reliable information that you took in a woman and 2 children about 2 months back, woman matching Mrs. Harper's description." "I taken a lot of folks passing through," Kenton replied. "Hospitality's important in these parts. But the only woman on this ranch now is my wife." Jane's breath caught at the lie, spoken so smoothly it almost sounded true. The man glanced toward the house, his gaze finding Jane on the porch. "That her?" Kenton didn't turn around. "That's Mrs. Quinn, yes." "Now, unless you have actual business with me, I suggest you move on. My men will be bringing the herd in soon, and the trail gets mighty dusty." As if on cue, Miguel and 3 other ranch hands appeared from different directions, casually armed and moving to flank Kenton. The implied threat was clear. The leader assessed the situation, his gaze lingering on Jane for an uncomfortable moment before he nodded to his companions. "My mistake," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it for a second. "We'll be on our way. But if you do happen to come across Jane Harper and her children, you might mention that Mr. Blackmore is a patient man, but not infinitely so." With that, they turned their horses and rode away. Kenton waited until they were well down the trail before approaching the house, his face grim. "They'll be back," he said quietly as he reached Jane. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will." Jane nodded, numb with fear. "I should leave. I've put you and everyone here in danger." "No," Kenton said firmly, taking her hands in his. "Running isn't the answer, Jane, not anymore." "What choice do I have?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Blackmore won't stop, the debt James owed. It's more money than I'll ever have." Kenton's expression hardened. "Men like Blackmore prey on fear. They count on people running, hiding, living in constant terror." He squeezed her hands gently. "But you're not alone anymore, Jane. I can't ask you to fight my battles," she protested. "You didn't ask," Kenton replied simply. "I'm offering." Before Jane could respond, they heard a small voice from the doorway. "Mama," Danny stood there, his eyes wide with fear. "Are the bad men gone?" Jane immediately went to him, kneeling to embrace him. "Yes, sweetheart, they're gone. Everything's all right." Danny looked past her to Kenton. "You made them go away?" Kenton nodded, his expression softening. "Yes, partner, and they won't bother us again." The boy seemed to consider this, then asked with childlike directness, "Are you really Mama's husband now?" Jane felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Kenton answered without hesitation. "Not yet," he said, his gaze meeting Jane's over Danny's head, "but I hope to be if your mama will have me." The following days were tense. with Kenton increasing patrols around the ranch perimeter and sending Miguel into town to gather information. The ranch hands, loyal to Kenton and protective of Jane and the children, kept watchful eyes on the surrounding countryside. Meanwhile, life continued. The first chill of autumn touched the air, and preparations for winter began in earnest. Vegetables were harvested from the kitchen garden, fruit preserved, meat smoked. Jane threw herself into these tasks, grateful for the distraction from her worries. Kenton, true to his word, began making inquiries about Vincent Blackmore through contacts in Denver. What he discovered was troubling. Blackmore had indeed extended his operations into Colorado territory, using the chaos of the mining boom to establish gambling halls and loan operations. He had powerful friends in politics and law enforcement, making him nearly untouchable through legal channels. One evening, after the children were asleep, Kenton shared this information with Jane as they sat by the fire in the main room. "He's not invincible," Kenton concluded. "Men like Blackmore have enemies, people they've wronged who would be happy to see them fall. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point." Jane studied his face, illuminated by the firelight. "You seem to know a great deal about such matters for a rancher." A shadow of something regret perhaps crossed Kenton's features. "Before I was a rancher, I was many things. My father wanted me to follow him into banking, but after he died, I found myself drawn to less conventional occupations." "Such as?" Jane prompted gently. Kenton hesitated, then sighed. "I rode with the Pinkertons for 3 years, mostly protecting payroll shipments to mining operations, occasionally tracking down fugitives." He met her gaze directly. "I've seen men like Blackmore before, Jane. They're powerful because people believe they're powerful, but everyone has a weakness." This revelation surprised Jane, adding another layer to the man she thought she was coming to know. "You never mentioned this before." "It's not a part of my life I particularly cherish," Kenton admitted. "I saw things, did things, but it taught me skills that might prove useful now." Jane considered this, then asked the question that had been plaguing her. "What did you mean, when you told those men I was your wife?" Kenton's expression softened. "It seemed the simplest way to protect you in that moment. If you were my wife, they'd have no claim on you." "Is that the only reason?" Jane pressed. Kenton set aside his pipe, turning to face her fully. "No," he said simply. "It's what I want, Jane, what I've wanted since. Well, longer than I should probably admit." Jane's heart quickened. "Even knowing the trouble I've brought to your door." "Especially knowing that," Kenton replied. "Because it shows me the kind of woman you are, brave enough to flee everything familiar to protect your children, strong enough to survive the journey, resilient enough to build a new life from nothing." He leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "I admire you, Jane Harper. And if you'll let me, I want to stand beside you against whatever comes: Blackmore, winter storms, or just the ordinary challenges of raising 2 remarkable children." Jane looked down at their joined hands, then back up to meet his steady gaze. In that moment, she knew her decision had already been made, perhaps weeks ago. "Yes," she whispered, Kenton's brow furrowed slightly. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you," Jane clarified, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, we'll stay. Yes to building a life here together." The joy that transformed Kenton's features was answer enough, but he pulled her gently into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this," he murmured. "I know," Jane replied, believing it completely. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Martha Fitzgerald fussing over Jane's appearance and Miguel serving as witness. Emma was delighted, having lobbied for this outcome from the beginning, while Danny seemed mostly concerned with his new official status as rancher's son. The celebrations were modest but joyful, with the ranch hands joining in a feast that lasted well into the evening. That night, after the celebrations had ended and they were finally alone, Jane found herself suddenly shy. It had been so long since she had been intimate with anyone, and James had been her only partner. Kenton sensed her nervousness, approaching her with the same gentle patience he showed in all things. "We have all the time in the world," he assured her, drawing her into his arms. "Nothing needs to happen that you don't want." But Jane wanted to be close to him, to know him completely, to begin this new chapter of their lives together in every sense. She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble beneath her fingertips. "I want this," she whispered. "I want you." Their first night together was a revelation for Jane. Where James had been hurried and often self-focused, Kenton was attentive and generous, his strength tempered by tenderness. In his arms, Jane rediscovered aspects of herself she had thought long buried: passion, abandoned joy. And afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, she felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that confirmed she had made the correct choice. As autumn deepened into winter, the rhythm of ranch life shifted. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, repairs were made to outbuildings, and supplies were stockpiled against the coming snow. Jane settled into her role as mistress of the ranch with surprising ease, finding that her organizational skills from managing a household in Chicago transferred well to the more expansive demands of ranch life. The children thrived in their new environment. Emma continued her love affair with horses, showing a natural aptitude that impressed even Miguel, who had been riding since childhood. Danny, growing more confident by the day, followed Kenton everywhere, soaking up knowledge about cattle, land management, and the myriad skills required of a successful rancher. "He's going to run this place someday," Kenton remarked one evening as he watched Danny carefully copying his method of repairing a bridle. "He has the instinct for it." Jane, who was mending by the fire, looked up with a smile. "Does that bother you, that he's not your blood?" Kenton shook his head firmly. "No more than it bothers me that Emma isn't. They're my children now in every way that matters." He hesitated, then added with a slight smile, "Though I wouldn't mind adding to our family if you're agreeable." The idea of having another child, a child with Kenton, sent a warm flutter through Jane. "I would like that," she admitted. "Very much." The first heavy snow came in early November, transforming the landscape overnight into a pristine white wilderness. Jane stood at the window of the main room, watching the children's delight as they discovered the joy of fresh snow. "It never looked like this in Chicago," she commented as Kenton joined her. "There, the snow turned gray and slushy almost immediately. Here it's magical." Kenton suggested, slipping an arm around her waist. Jane leaned into him, nodding. "Yes, everything here has a clarity, a purity that I never knew before." The sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful moment. Jane tensed immediately, her mind going to Blackmore's men, but Kenton squeezed her reassuringly. "It's Miguel," he said, having recognized the pattern of hoofbeats. "He rode into town yesterday for supplies before the pass got too dangerous." They moved to the porch as Miguel approached, accompanied by another rider, the sheriff from Anima's Forks, a grizzled man named Harlow who had been friendly but distant during their brief encounters in town. "Mr. Quinn," the sheriff greeted them, dismounting stiffly. "Mrs. Quinn. Hope you don't mind me riding out with Miguel here." "Not at all," Kenton replied, though Jane could feel the alertness in his posture. "Come in out of the cold. Martha made fresh coffee this morning." Once settled around the kitchen table with steaming cups, Sheriff Harlow got to the point. "Had some excitement in town yesterday," he said, warming his hands on the mug. 3 men tried to rob the bank, not local city types, well-dressed." He glanced meaningfully at Jane. "One of them mentioned the name Blackmore during the attempt." Jane's hand trembled slightly, spilling a drop of coffee. Kenton placed his hand over hers, steadying her. "What happened?" he asked the sheriff. Harlow's weathered face broke into a grim smile. "They didn't count on half the town being armed, or on Miss Adeline at the telegraph office being handy with a shotgun. 2 of them are dead. The 3rd's in my jail with a bullet in his shoulder, singing like a canary to save his hide." He fixed Jane with a direct look. He says they were sent to get money to continue searching for a woman named Jane Harper and her children. Says this Blackmore fellow is obsessed with finding her, has men looking all over Colorado territory. Jane felt the blood drain from her face. "I'm Jane Harper," she said softly, "or I was." Sheriff Harlow nodded, unsurprised. "Figured as much from what Miguel's told me. The thing is, Mrs. Quinn, this fellow in my jail is convinced you're still in Denver or maybe headed to San Francisco. Doesn't seem to know you're right here in Animas Forks County, married to one of our most respected ranchers." Kenton's expression showed dawning understanding. "You're not going to correct his misconception." "Don't see why I should," Harlow replied with a shrug. "Man tried to rob our bank, threatened our people. Far as I'm concerned, he and his boss can chase ghosts from here to California." He sipped his coffee. "Besides, winter's setting in. No one's crossing those mountains till spring, and by then, well, situations change." Jane felt a surge of gratitude toward this gruff man who had no reason to protect her except a basic sense of justice. "Thank you," she said simply. Harlow waved away her thanks. "Just doing my job, madam. Besides, any woman who can survive that northern trail alone with 2 young'uns has earned her peace in my book." After the sheriff and Miguel departed, Jane stood in the kitchen, processing what they had learned. Blackmore was still searching for her, still determined to collect his twisted version of James's debt. But for the moment, at least, the immediate threat had passed. "We're safe here," Kenton assured her, drawing her into his embrace. "Harlow's a good man, and he has influence with the territorial authorities. By spring, we'll have a more permanent solution." Jane looked up at him, struck again by how much her life had changed in a few short months. From desperate flight to sanctuary, from widow to wife, from solitary struggle to shared strength. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now, naturally. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm grateful for it every day." Kenton's eyes softened as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It was fate, Jane. The moment I found you on that trail, I think some part of me knew you were meant to be here with me. It just took us both a little time to realize it." As winter settled fully over the mountains, life at the Double Q Ranch developed a cozy intimacy. Snowbound days were filled with indoor projects, Jane teaching Emma to sew, Kenton showing Danny how to carve wood, evenings spent reading aloud by the fire or playing simple games. The isolation that had once haunted Kenton now felt like a precious gift, allowing their new family to bond without the intrusions of the outside world. In January, as a blizzard howled around the sturdy walls of the ranch house, Jane shared her suspicion that she was carrying Kenton's child. The joy that illuminated his face in that moment was something Jane knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "I hope it's a girl," he said that night as they lay together in the darkness. "With your spirit and your eyes," Jane smiled, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "I think it's a boy, strong and steady like his father." When spring finally arrived, bringing with it the greening of the valley and the birth of new calves, it also brought news. Sheriff Harlow rode out to the ranch one April morning, his expression more relaxed than Jane had ever seen it. "Thought you'd want to know," he said as they sat on the porch, watching the children help Miguel with the horses. "Vincent Blackmore won't be troubling you or anyone else again." Jane's hand instinctively went to her slightly rounded belly. "What happened?" "Seems he made enemies in higher places than he realized," Harlow explained. "Federal marshals arrested him in Denver last week. Fraud, extortion, suspected involvement in at least 3 murders. The territorial governor himself signed the warrant." He glanced at Kenton. "Your inquiries might have helped that along, Quinn." Kenton's face revealed nothing, but Jane suspected the connections from his Pinkerton days had indeed played a role. "Justice has a way of finding men like Blackmore eventually," was all he said. The relief Jane felt was profound, like the lifting of a weight she had carried for so long she'd almost forgotten its presence. That night, as she and Kenton walked along the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the ranch, she finally felt free to contemplate a future without fear. "I want to make this official," she said, stopping to face him in the golden light of sunset. "I want to adopt Emma and Danny legally, give them your name." Kenton's smile was tender. "I'd like nothing better. They're already Quinns in my heart." "And I want to expand the house," Jane continued, warming to her topic. "Add rooms for the children as they grow, maybe a proper study for you, a bigger kitchen." Kenton laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Sounds like you're planning to put down permanent roots, Mrs. Quinn." "The most permanent," Jane confirmed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "This is our home. This is where we belong." As they walked back to the house, hand in hand in the gathering twilight, Jane reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The desperate flight from Chicago, the grueling trail west, the moment of collapse that had seemed like the end but had actually been the beginning. How strange that her greatest moment of weakness had led to her greatest strength. How miraculous that in the vast wilderness of the Colorado Territory, she had found not just shelter but love. Their son, James Kenton Quinn, was born that September, a healthy boy with his father's determined chin and his mother's warm eyes. Emma and Danny were enchanted with their new brother, competing for the privilege of helping with his care. As Jane rocked her infant son by the fire on a crisp autumn evening, watching Kenton teach Emma and Danny a card game at the table, she felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had been seeking all along, not just safety or security, but belonging, purpose, family. "Happy?" Kenton asked softly, noticing her emotional state as he came to stand beside her chair. "Beyond words," Jane replied, looking up at the man who had transformed her life with a simple act of kindness on a dusty trail. "I never imagined I could be this happy." Kenton leaned down to press a kiss to her forehead, then to the downy head of their son. "This is just the beginning, Jane. We have a lifetime ahead of us." And as the first snowflakes of winter began to dance outside the window, Jane Quinn closed her eyes in gratitude for the beautiful life that had risen from the ashes of despair, for the love that had found her when she least expected it, and for the cowboy who had carried her home.